The hum of the diner was a steady backdrop to the Saturday breakfast rush. Families chattered over pancakes, and the clinking of coffee cups echoed off the walls. Sarah Jennings sat alone in a corner booth, her back to the wall, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her ceramic mug. Her worn jacket and faded jeans blended into the background, making her just another unassuming face in the crowd. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, smiled as she refilled Sarah's cup. "You waiting for someone, hun?" "Just my dad," Sarah replied softly. Her voice carried a warmth that didn't match the cautious way she sat, as though she were accustomed to being overlooked. Out front, the rumble of motorcycles shattered the diner's calm. A group of 5 burly men swaggered in, leather jackets emblazoned with skulls and flames. They scanned the room like they owned it, their voices booming as they jeered at each other. Look at this place," one of them sneered, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Small town dump." They took the booth nearest Sarah, their laughter grating. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, glanced her way and smirked. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, loud enough for the room to hear. "That seat taken." Sarah didn't answer. She kept her eyes on her coffee, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Don't think she heard you, Rick," another one chuckled. Rick stood, his boots heavy against the tile floor as he approached her booth. He leaned down, invading her space. "I said." She heard a deep voice from the doorway. The diner fell silent. All heads turned to the man standing at the entrance. He was tall, with a military bearing. His face was weathered but strong. His sunglasses concealed his eyes, but the white cane in his hand told the story. This was her father, the blind veteran. Sarah's face softened as her father, Tom Jennings, tapped his way toward her booth. He moved with confidence despite his blindness, his cane sweeping the floor in practiced arcs. The bikers exchanged glances, their smirks faltering. "Morning, Dad," Sarah said, standing to guide him into the seat across from her. "Morning, sweetheart." Tom's voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that demanded respect without raising its volume. He sat carefully, folding his cane and resting it on the table. Rick, still standing nearby, chuckled. "Well, isn't this cute? Daddy's here to save the day." Tom tilted his head toward the voice, his expression unreadable behind the dark glasses. "I don't know who you are, son, but I suggest you walk away." The other bikers hooted, egging Rick on. "What's he going to do?" "He can't even see me," Rick said, leaning closer. Sarah's jaw tightened. She placed a hand on the table, steadying herself. "Leave us alone," she said firmly. Rick ignored her, his grin widening. "What's the matter, old man? You need your little girl to fight your battles." Tom's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't need to see Rick to sense the man's arrogance. "I've fought bigger battles than you'll ever know, son," he said evenly. "But if you're smart, you'll sit down and enjoy your breakfast before you make a mistake." The tension in the diner was palpable. The waitress froze mid-step, and other patrons whispered nervously. Rick's laughter filled the silence, but there was an edge to it now, a flicker of uncertainty. Sarah reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid of the bikers. No, her fear was something else, something deeper. She dialed a number, her voice low but steady. "It's me," she said. "I need you here now." Minutes passed like hours, the air in the diner thick with unease. The bikers, emboldened by the lack of action, resumed their crude jokes, their voices louder than before. Rick sat back down with his group, throwing occasional glances at Sarah and Tom. Tom sat calmly, sipping his coffee as though nothing was amiss. Sarah, however, couldn't hide the tension in her posture. She kept checking the door, her phone resting on the table like a lifeline. "Hey, sweetheart," one of the bikers called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You going to tell us who you called? Your boyfriend? The sheriff?" The group erupted in laughter, but their jeers were cut short by the sound of approaching engines. Not one or two, but a thunderous roar that grew louder with every second. Heads turned toward the diner windows as a line of black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Their sleek frames gleamed in the morning sun. The vehicles came to a stop, and the doors opened in unison. Men and women in sharp suits stepped out, their movements precise and purposeful. They weren't police, but they carried an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. The diner's door swung open, and a man in his 40s entered. His suit immaculate, his expression cold. He scanned the room before his eyes landed on Sarah. "Miss Jennings," he said, his voice clipped. "Are you all right?" The bikers exchanged uneasy looks. Rick shifted in his seat, his bravado faltering. "Who the hell are these people?" he muttered. Sarah stood, her shoulders squared. "They work for me," she said simply. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the SUVs idling outside. Rick's jaw tightened as he studied Sarah, his earlier confidence melting into confusion. "You," he scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "What, you some kind of big shot?" Sarah's lips curved into a small, cold smile. "Something like that." The man in the suit stepped closer, his eyes narrowing on the bikers. "Miss Jennings doesn't appreciate being harassed," he said, his tone icy. "I suggest you apologize and leave now." Rick stood, his fists clenching. "And if we don't?" The suited man didn't flinch. "Then we'll have a problem." Sarah crossed her arms, her voice steady. "You're outnumbered, Rick, and trust me, you don't want to test their patience." One of the bikers muttered something under his breath, but Rick hesitated. His gaze flicked to the men and women in suits, then back to Sarah. Tom leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "You've got a choice to make, son," he said quietly. "Choose wisely." Rick's bravado crumbled with a muttered curse. He turned and stormed out, his gang following reluctantly. The diner erupted in whispers as the tension broke. Sarah exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. "You okay, sweetheart?" Tom asked gently. Sarah nodded, her voice soft. "Yeah, Dad, I'm okay." But as she sat down, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. "It's not over," she murmured. Tom tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes met his, a spark of determination in her gaze. "Their part." The biker's departure left the diner buzzing with murmurs, but Sarah wasn't listening. She stared at her phone, her brows furrowed in concentration. Tom, ever perceptive despite his blindness, could sense her tension. "What's going on, Sarah?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, her fingers tapping the screen. "This isn't just about them, Dad. Rick and his buddies, they're tied to something worse." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "I've been tracking them for months. They're part of a hate group that's been targeting veterans and minorities across the state. Intimidation, vandalism, violence, you name it." Tom's jaw tightened, his calm demeanor cracking for a moment. "And you didn't tell me." "Didn't want to worry you," she admitted, "but now they've made it personal." Tom reached across the table, his calloused hand finding hers. "Sarah, I may be blind, but I'm not helpless. Whatever you're planning, you don't have to do it alone." Before Sarah could respond, the man in the suit cleared his throat. "Miss Jennings, we should leave. The team will handle the cleanup here." Sarah nodded, rising from her seat. "Dad, let's go. I'll explain on the way." Tom stood, unfolding his cane. "Where are we going?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "To finish what they started." The caravan of SUVs wound its way out of the small town, heading toward the outskirts where a nondescript warehouse sat hidden behind rows of pine trees. Inside, the space was nothing like its exterior. Bright lights illuminated rows of monitors, desks with laptops, and a team of people moving with military precision. Tom paused as he stepped inside, his hand resting on Sarah's arm. "What is this?" "This," Sarah said, gesturing to the bustling room, "is what I've been working on. It's a private task force I built to tackle hate crimes and systemic corruption. We've been operating quietly, gathering evidence, and taking down groups like Rick's." Tom's face remained neutral, but his voice carried a hint of pride. You did all this? Sarah shrugged. After what happened to Mom, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Anyway, we've been monitoring that biker gang for weeks. Rick's crew is small, but they're connected to a larger network. They've been infiltrating small towns, trying to spread their poison under the radar. Tom gripped his cane tightly. And now they've come after us. Sarah nodded. Exactly, but they made a mistake because now we're going after them. Sarah's lead analyst, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, approached with a tablet in hand. We've tracked Rick and his gang back to their clubhouse. It's a biker bar on the edge of town, but it's more than that. It's their base of operations. Do they know we're on to them? Sarah asked. Rachel shook her head. Doubt it, but there's more. The bar is hosting a meeting tonight with members of their larger network. If we move now, we could catch some of the higher-ups. Tom's expression darkened. These people aren't just a bunch of loudmouths. They're dangerous. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's why we're not going in blind. No offense, Dad. Tom smirked. None taken. Rachel continued. We've coordinated with local law enforcement, but we'll take the lead. We've got undercover agents ready to move in, and we've secured warrants for their arrests. Sarah nodded. Good. Let's make sure this ends tonight. Tom turned toward his daughter, his voice low. You're taking a risk, Sarah. These people won't go down without a fight. Sarah met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. I know, Dad, but someone has to stand up to them, and I'm not backing down. The task force parked a mile away from the biker bar, hidden in the shadows of a dense forest. Through binoculars and surveillance drones, they watched as motorcycles and pickup trucks rolled into the gravel lot, one after another. Inside the command van, Sarah stood over a monitor, her expression tense. How many so far? Rachel clicked through the feeds. At least 30, and that's just the ground level. There's a basement below the bar. We think that's where the leadership's meeting. Tom sat nearby, his head tilted as he listened to the chatter. You've got the numbers, but don't underestimate them. These people thrive on fear. They'll fight back if cornered. Sarah glanced at him. That's why we're going in with a plan. No unnecessary risks. The team moved into position, donning tactical gear and earpieces. Sarah double-checked her sidearm, her jaw set. Everyone ready? Tom's voice cut through the tension. Sarah. She turned, surprised to see him standing, his cane in hand. You're not going in there without me. Dad, no. It's too dangerous. Tom's expression hardened. I didn't survive 2 tours overseas to sit on the sidelines. I'm going. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Stay close to me. The team moved swiftly, slipping through the woods and surrounding the bar. Sarah led the way, her father close behind, his cane tapping lightly against the ground. Inside, the bar was alive with noise, laughter, shouting, and the clinking of glasses. Rick and his gang were seated near the center, surrounded by men in patched vests. Sarah's voice crackled through the earpieces. On my count. 3, 2, 1. The doors burst open, and the task force stormed in, weapons drawn. Everyone hands in the air. Chaos erupted. Some of the bikers froze, their faces pale, while others scrambled for weapons. Rick stood, his chair toppling over. What the hell is this? Sarah stepped forward, her badge held high. It's over, Rick. You're under arrest. Rick sneered. You think you can just walk in here and take us down? Tom's voice rang out, calm but commanding. She doesn't think. She knows. Rick turned, his expression twisting into one of disbelief. You again. Tom took a step forward, his cane tapping against the floor. You've spent your life tearing people down, but tonight you answer for it. The room erupted into chaos as the bikers resisted. Fists flew, tables overturned, and shouts filled the air. Sarah moved with precision, dodging a wild swing and taking down a burly man with a swift kick. Tom, despite his blindness, held his ground, listening to the commotion around him. He used his cane to trip an advancing biker, sending the man sprawling. Rick lunged at Sarah, but she sidestepped him easily, slamming him into a wall. "It's over, Rick," she shouted. The task force quickly regained control, subduing the remaining bikers and cuffing them. Rick, his face bloodied, glared at Sarah as he was hauled to his feet. "You think this changes anything? There's more of us. You'll never stop us all." Sarah leaned in, her voice cold. "Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure you never hurt anyone again." Back at the command center, the team celebrated their success. The operation had been a resounding victory, with dozens of arrests and enough evidence to dismantle the network. Tom sat beside Sarah, a proud smile on his face. "You did good, kid." Sarah shook her head. "We did good." Rachel approached with a folder. "This is just the beginning. The evidence we found links them to other groups across the state. We've got a lot of work to do." Sarah nodded, determination in her eyes. "Then let's get to it." Weeks later, the diner was quiet again. Sarah and Tom sat in their usual booth, enjoying a rare moment of peace. "Think they'll come back?" "Mas." Sarah shook her head. "Not a chance. And if they do, we'll be ready." Tom smiled, lifting his coffee. "To resilience." Sarah clinked her mug against his. "To justice." Outside, the world carried on, but inside, a father and daughter knew they had made a difference, and they weren't done yet.